Hope you're doing well today. It is December 14th. We are in First Timothy today. Our reading today is First Timothy chapter 3 through 6, chapters 3 through 6. And let's just read a little bit. Verse 1, this is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. The following verses, verses 8 through 13, speak about the qualifications for deacons. Verse 14, and let me move down a little bit. As I said, qualifications for deacons. And then verse 14, these things I write to you. I write to you, verse 15, that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. And there's more about his directions specifically to Timothy in chapter 4. But let's move back up here looking at this passage. And I think it's interesting that these things were written to Timothy, that the qualifications for elders were sent to Timothy and Titus. We know in Titus, which that's probably actually going to be our reading for tomorrow, in Titus, I left you in Crete to set the things and order those things which were lacking. And that this was, as this transition is happening, as we're going from the time of the apostles, the foundation, well, once the foundation is laid, you do not need to keep laying the foundation. And so these things are being set in order. And so there needed to be elders, if there were those who were qualified, and so the qualifications are given. But my point is, why give them to Timothy and Titus? These letters are not sent to the church in Ephesus or the church in Crete. There were letters sent to the church. There was a letter sent to the church in Ephesus. But these qualifications were specifically sent to Timothy and Titus. Well, why is that? And I would suggest it's because of the role that Timothy and Titus were playing. And I think you can actually see that in our reading. Again, to look over in chapter 5, after speaking about lengthier verse on the widows, verse 19, do not receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses. Those who are sinning rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest also may fear. I charge you before God and the Lord Jesus Christ and the elect angels that you observe these things without prejudice, doing nothing with partiality. Do not lay hands on anyone hastily, nor share in other people's sins. Keep yourself pure. Then you have the verse about the drinking. Some men's sins are clearly evident, preceding them to judgment, but those of some men follow later. But you have within this context of dealing with elders, right? Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy, and pardon me if you could hear that bell. Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. Well, who's the one who would determine whether or not the elders who are ruling well? Paul had entrusted this to Timothy. So, as we think about this, and we think about why write these things to Timothy, well, it's because Timothy had this responsibility as Titus had this responsibility. Set these things in order. Okay. So, to look at the qualifications and to just think about it somewhat quickly and briefly. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. Well, what is that work? Because it is a work. A lot of people are like Diotrephes, the one who desires the preeminence. Those who desire this, they desire the work. Well, what is the work of a shepherd? What is the work of a shepherd? And just get that picture. We have to get that picture in our mind. What is the work of a shepherd? And you might think about, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. That picture that is used in Psalm 23 helps us to understand what is the role of a shepherd. In Titus, he's going to be there. There are some people who are going to need their mouths shut, and that was one of the elders' jobs. Why does a shepherd have a rod and a staff? And you might just think about, what man of you, if he has 100 sheep, if he loses one, why will he not go after the one? So you think about the Lord's words to Peter, right? Feed my lambs, tend my lambs, feed my flock. You have that passage. Feeding, tending, especially that tending there, because that's actually the word for pastor, I believe. And you have that concept. What is the work of a shepherd? Sometimes, people will think, well, it's just a figurehead. It's like, no, there are wolves. There are goats. There is sickness. Walls need to be mended. If you have no walls, if you have no walls and you have no rod and you have no staff and you have no medicine, well, then what's going to happen to the flock? That doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. Okay, back to our passage. A bishop then must be blameless. And that's one reason. This is where the other translations are above reproach, ESV. New American Standard is above reproach. King James must be blameless. Down at the bottom, you see Strong's definition for this. Not arrested, that is by implication, inculpable, blameless, unrebukable. So you have above reproach. Sometimes folks have the idea, and it's almost like they glory in blame. And it's like it's almost a false, it is a false humility, is what it is. And they'll think that we need to glory in blame. And you need to say things like, I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm still working on issues. And you need to be like, I don't have things myself figured out, but and they'll say things like that. And it's like, well, if you don't have things figured out yet, if you have a beam or a speck in your eye, before you try to help someone else, what do you need to do? What do you call someone who has not disciplined themselves? What do you call someone who has not disciplined themselves and they attempt to discipline someone else? The name for that is a hypocrite. That's what that is. But some people, sometimes it's an odd thing because it's a false sense of humility, and they glory in blame. All I know is what the passage says. A bishop then must be blameless. Does that mean they've never sinned? No, that's not what it means. But if they have sinned, what have they done? Have they disciplined themselves? There's a reason that this person should not be a novice. There's a reason that this person, and we'll talk more about that here in a second, but it's like, when people say, oh, I haven't gotten this figured out yet, and I'm still working, and I'm still trying to do this, and I have all these problems, are you just glossing over those problems? Are you disciplining yourself? Or are you, in fact, a hypocrite? Another one, and we're not going to go through all these, but there are things in here that point to the home of the man, as it talks about his wife, as it talks about his children. So you have this look into the home. It's interesting that looking at this from a preacher's perspective, a lot of folks want to go after the preacher's wife. A lot of folks like to talk about a preacher's wife. Do you know of too many passages that talk about preachers' wives? But there are passages that talk about elders' wives. A lot of people like to go after the preacher's kids. How many verses talk about the preacher's kids specifically? But there are passages that specifically talk about elders' wives and elders' children, if a man so desires this work. So, might think about that idea. Another thing I wanted to see is talking about pride. Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. I remember hearing an elder speaking about another elder, and the one fella said, he just likes to hear himself talk sometimes. What do you call someone who just likes to hear themselves talk? And it was interesting. It's pride is what it is. And sometimes folks will joke about being proud, and they'll just blow it off. And I remember hearing a fella say one time that, his wife just couldn't talk to him, that his wife wasn't able to tell him anything. There was a fella in the Old Testament like that. His name was Nabal. Nabal was a fool, as his name means. It's pride. And God always resists the proud. And what a horrible thing. What a horrible thing if pride finds its way into an eldership. But that is exactly what was going to happen in Ephesus, by the way. Before we touch on that, though, as we wrap things up, other things you could look at within this passage: not greedy for money, covetousness. And the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And that can have an effect on things. Able to teach. Other passages that speak about elders talks about not lording it over the flock, but being examples. Here, the qualification for being able to teach. And we think about, well, what would lording it over the flock look like? And it would look like just making decisions and then dictating. And sometimes that happens as well. The church needs shepherds. The church needs shepherds. It needs shepherds who do the shepherd's job, because shepherds do have a job. Some people, they're just looking for cheerleaders. They're just looking for people, they're not comfortable with the rod and the staff. So they want to take the rod and the staff away from the shepherds. Or they want to just get shepherds that don't have a rod and a staff. And they're not really interested in fences. They want to just wander in and out, and they just don't care for discipline. And so they look for shepherds that don't really care for discipline. And then they wonder why the flock is in the state that it's in. And it happens. It's a sad thing. We need shepherds. The church needs shepherds. Every church needs shepherds, because every church needs this work to happen. So, here, speaking to Timothy, I write these things to you so that you know how you ought to conduct yourself in the church of God. Appreciate you. Thanks for studying along with us today. Hope you have a good day. Hope you join us tomorrow for another look into God's Word.